Hey there, TV lovers! We are back with the Season 3 of Breaking Bad. Alright, let's jump into the ocean of Season 3 of Breaking Bad. Things kick off with chaos as two deadly cartel hitmen, the cousins, arrive in New Mexico, targeting Heisenberg to avenge their cousin Tuco's death. Yes, that's a hell of a revenge game. Meanwhile, Walter's double life unravels. Skyler wants a divorce after she got to know about his meth empire. Jessie struggles with guilt after Jane's death, and Gus Fring emerges as the most calculating figure yet, offering Walt millions to cook in a state-of-the-art lab. This is going to be a heck of a ride. Let's quickly know the key characters of this season, aside from the ones already mentioned in Season 2. Donald Margolis, Jesse's former landlord who is still grieving over the death of his daughter Jane. Old Joe, a junkyard owner who helps Walt and Jessie destroy the RV they cooked meth in. Diane Pinkman, Jesse's mother. Episode 1 in the pilot episode of Breaking Bad Season 3 titled No Mas. In a small Mexican village, a group crawls on their bellies up a dusty road toward a shrine for Santa Muerte, the folk deity of death. A sleek Mercedes pulls up, and two men in sharp suits and cowboy boots join the crawling procession. At the shrine, they leave an offering and pin up a drawing of Heisenberg. Meanwhile, in Albuquerque, the fallout from the Wayfarer 515 crash dominates the news. Walt, feeling guilty for his role in the tragedy, tries to burn his drug money on a grill but quickly changes his mind, throwing the flaming grill, and himself, into the pool. Skyler, seeking a divorce, meets with a lawyer who advises her to stay in the house to strengthen her case. She's visibly uneasy discussing finances. Hank came to help Walt move.
Jesus. What do you got in there? Cinder blocks?
$500,000 in cash.
Hank laughs, assuming that Walt is joking. At rehab, Jessie begins focusing on self-acceptance. Back at school, a rattled Walt gives an awkward assembly speech about the crash, trying to downplay its impact by citing worse disasters. Elsewhere, Skyler confronts Walt, accusing him of being a drug dealer. Walt admits to cooking meth, but that he handles the production, not the dealing.
But I'm a manufacturer, I'm not a dealer.
Skyler offers him a deal. She promises not to tell Hank or anyone else what Walt is doing, but only if he grants the divorce and stays away from her and the children. She then hurriedly leaves. As Jessie reflects on his guilt, Walt assures him not to blame himself. Gus offers Walt $3 million to cook for 3 months, but Walt declines, prioritizing his family. Meanwhile, the two men cross into Texas, ruthlessly killing migrants and setting their truck ablaze before vanishing into the desert. Episode 2, in the second episode of Breaking Bad Season 3 titled Caballo Sin Nombre. Walt, driving down a rural road while listening to A Horse with No Name, gets pulled over for his cracked windshield. The officer isn't sympathetic despite explaining it's from Wayfarer 515 debris. Agitated, Walt argues until he's pepper sprayed and arrested. At the station, Walt calls Hank, who picks him up. Walt apologizes and shares that Skyler won't let him see his kids. Meanwhile, Jesse sees his childhood home for sale. His father gives him a cold reception and avoids inviting him inside. Hurt, Jesse leaves. At her job, Skyler confronts Ted about fraudulent bookkeeping. Though initially firm, she seems to soften when Ted says he's only trying to stay afloat for his kids. Jesse hires Saul to buy his house. Saul counters his parents' $875K price with a $400K offer, leveraging their failure to disclose the basement meth lab. They reluctantly agree, and Jesse becomes the new owner, shutting the door on his shocked parents. At home, Walt tries to reconcile with Skyler by bringing pizza. She refuses, and frustrated, Walt hurls the pizza onto the roof. Later, the cousins break into Walt's house to kill him, but receive a mysterious Polos text and leave. Walt exits the shower, finding signs of their presence, but unaware of how close he is to death. Episode 3. In the third episode of Breaking Bad Season 3 titled IFT, in a flashback sequence, DEA informant Tortuga enjoys a drink at a seedy Mexican cantina with his boss, El Jefe. El Jefe presents him with a tortoise as a birthday gift but writes Hola DEA on its shell, signaling betrayal. The cousins then pin Tortuga down and decapitate him with a machete. Outside Walt's house, Mike watches Walt remove the pizza from the roof. He reports to Gus that Walt is alive. Inside, Skyler finds Walt refusing to leave. She calls the police, but they can't make him leave since they're still married and Walt hasn't broken any laws. Skyler had no option except to allow him to stay. Meanwhile, Jesse is stuck in his grief, repeatedly calling Jane's voicemail. Saul visits and asks Jessie to persuade Walt to cook again. Jessie agrees, but later hears Jane's number is disconnected, devastating him.
The number you have reached 1494985 in area code 505 is no longer.
Hank faces his transfer to El Paso with hidden dread. Later, he vents his anxiety by starting a bar fight, forcing Gomez to cover for him at the DEA office. At home, Skylar reveals Walt's secret to her lawyer, who urges her to divorce him. Skylar hesitates, concerned about Junior learning the truth. Walt justifies his actions, claiming the money secures their future. Skylar retaliates by seducing Ted and bluntly tells Walt, "I fucked Ted," leaving him silently seething as she calmly calls the kids to dinner.
I want you both to eat your salad, okay?
Really?
No.
Episode 4. In the 4th episode of Breaking Bad Season 3 titled Green Light. At a desert gas station, Jesse tries to pay for gas with meth when he's short on cash. The cashier hesitates but takes in when a state trooper goes to the counter behind Jesse. At Beneke Fabricators, Walt attempts to confront Ted by hurling a potted plant at his office window, but it bounces off.
You'll open the door!
Security throws him out as Skylar watches. Outside, Mike picks up Walt and later removes surveillance bugs from his house. Before leaving, Mike spots a scythe symbol drawn on the street, likely left by the cousins. At school, Walt's erratic behavior gets him placed on leave after he awkwardly tries to kiss Principal Carmen.
Hey! Walt, what's wrong with you?
Meanwhile, Hank skips his El Paso assignment upon hearing the blue meth has resurfaced. Jesse shows Walt a new batch of meth he cooked himself and asks for help meeting Gus. Walt nitpicks the quality and refuses, angering Jesse, who drives off. Later, Jesse asks Saul to set up a deal, despite Gus's reluctance to work with junkies. At a gas station, Hank questions the cashier and learns about an RV linked to the blue meth. Spotting an ATM camera nearby, he begins to piece things together. Walt learns Donald Margolis attempted suicide, deepening his guilt. Moments later, Victor throws a bag of money into Walt's car, saying, "Your half," as Walt sits at a green light, lost in thought. Episode 5, in the 5th episode of Breaking Bad Season 3 titled Mass. In the pilot's flashback, Walt gives Jesse $7,000 to buy an RV. Instead, Jesse blows most of it at a strip club with Skinny Pete and Combo, leaving only $1,400 by morning. Combo helps by selling a stolen RV for that price. In 2009, after a night with Ted, Skylar enjoys his heated bathroom floor and ponders the cost. Ted, growing attached, offers her space in his home. Meanwhile, Walt, upset about Jesse's demands for cash, hangs up angrily after denying any secret deals with Gus.
One-man glass factory. I will rock that RV 24/7.
Hank and Gomez surveil an RV but find an innocent couple playing cards. Later, Marie urges Hank to open up about avoiding El Paso. He claims he's staying in Albuquerque for the Heisenberg case. Gus shows Walt a state-of-the-art super lab, persuading him that providing for his family justifies past choices. Skylar, uneasy at Ted's luxury, distances herself. Back home, she allows Walt to comfort Holly, a small truce in their tense relationship. Hank's investigation heats up when a lead from the DMV uncovers an overlooked RV registration, tying the vehicle to Combo. Skylar confronts the moral dilemma of Walt's drug money with her lawyer. Walt signs divorce papers and moves out. Meanwhile, Jesse, furious over Gus's manipulation, smashes Walt's windshield, escalating tensions. Episode 6, in the 6th episode of Breaking Bad Season 3 titled Sunset. On the Tohajili Reservation, a tribal police officer investigates an elderly woman's disappearance, finding her body behind an outhouse. Inside her home, Leonel Salamanca emerges calmly, but as the officer is distracted, Marco Salamanca ambushes and kills him with an axe. Walt, eyeing a new condo, gets a call from Skylar, upset over divorce papers she found in Holly's crib. She accuses him of using drug money for child support, only to realize he's been paying their bills with it for months. At Jesse's, Badger and Skinny Pete marvel at Jesse's blue meth. Jessie invites them back into business with caution. Hank, staking out Jessie's house, spots Badger, tying him to Heisenberg's arrest. At Los Pollos Hermanos, the cousin's silent presence frustrates Gus, but he remains calm. Meanwhile, Walt meets his lab assistant Gail, whose passion for chemistry impresses him. Hank, still surveilling Jessie, presses Walt about an RV tied to Heisenberg. Panicking, Walt calls Saul, who urges him to destroy it. At the junkyard, Jessie confronts Walt about scrapping the RV, unaware Hank has trailed him. Hank arrives, demanding entry, but old Joe cites legal protections for the RV as a domicile. Stalling, Walt calls Saul, who orchestrates a fake emergency about Marie. Hank rushes off,
Okay.
leaving Walt and Jessie free to destroy the RV. At sunset, Gus meets the cousins, forbidding them from harming Walt until business concludes. Instead, he permits them to target the DEA agent responsible for Tuco's death. Episode 7. In the 7th episode of Breaking Bad Season 3 titled 1 Minute. In a 1988 flashback in Mexico, young Lionel and Marco fight over a toy while their uncle, Hector Salamanca, mocks someone he calls the Chicken Man during a call. When Lionel wishes Marco dead, Hector cruelly dunks Marco's head in icy water, nearly drowning him. Lionel stops him only after slapping Hector, who then teaches them that family is all. Fast forward to 2009, the now-grown cousins light candles at a Santa Muerte shrine, placing a photo of Hank Schrader at its center. Meanwhile, furious over being tricked, Hank violently attacks Jessie at his home, leaving him unconscious and bloody.
You have my cell phone number! You have my wife's name! How'd you do it? Talk! Who you working with?
Realizing his mistake, Hank calls for an ambulance but is advised to get a lawyer as Jessie presses charges. At the hospital, Saul insists on using police brutality to protect Jessie, who vows revenge on Hank and plans to start cooking meth solo. Walt tries to calm Jessie, but Saul warns Walt they may need drastic measures if Jessie doesn't relent. Hank, at the DEA, admits his actions but refuses to cover them up, earning a suspension. He breaks down in Marie's arms but remains determined to be honest. Walt convinces Gus to replace Gail with Jessie, despite Jessie initially rejecting him out of anger. Later, Jessie agrees, dropping charges against Hank. The episode climaxes as the cousins ambush Hank in a parking lot. Severely injured, Hank cleverly uses the Black Death bullet to kill Marco, narrowly escaping death. Episode 8. In the 8th episode of Breaking Bad Season 3 titled, I See You. In the hospital, Jessie, bruised and battered, is wheeled out by an orderly and waits for his ride. As he sits outside, he watches Hank, critically wounded, being rushed in by paramedics. Hank is immediately prepped for surgery while Jessie returns outside. Eventually, Skinny Pete picks him up, and when he notices Jessie's injuries, Jessie casually replies,
Actually, I'm great.
In the Superlab, Walt tries to fire Gail without causing hurt feelings, using a musical analogy, Walt's classical and Gail's jazz. Just then, Jessie bursts in, amazed by the lab setup. Walt then learns Hank has been shot when Jessie mentions it, revealing that the news hadn't reached him due to the lack of signal in the lab. At the hospital, the family gathers, and Skyler defends Walt against Marie's anger, blaming him for starting the trouble. Meanwhile, Gus gets a call from Juan Bolsa, who's frantic about the cartel's response to Hank's shooting. Gus denies approval of the hit on Hank and plans to take care of Lionel, the surviving cousin. Walt, unsure of what to do next, waits with his family, trying to keep up appearances while tensions rise. Episode 9. In the 9th episode of Breaking Bad Season 3 titled, Kafkaesque. In this episode, we see Walt and Jessie at a turning point in their lives and business. After cooking more meth than needed, Jessie wants to save the extra for the next batch, but Walt insists on shipping it all, which frustrates Jessie, who realizes just how much Gus is making off them. Meanwhile, Hank is recovering from his injuries, but the prognosis isn't great, and insurance struggles create tension between Skyler and Marie. Skyler offers to help pay for Hank's bills by fabricating a story about Walt making money through illegal blackjack. Walt plays along, surprised by how easily Skyler lies. In a therapy session, Jessie expresses frustration with his new corporate life. complaining about his boss. Later, Saul proposes a nail spa business to launder Jesse's money, but Jessie isn't interested in the idea. Walt visits Gus's chicken farm to discuss their partnership and feels empowered by Gus's strategy to dominate the meth market. This leads Walt to make reckless decisions like driving dangerously on the way home. The episode shows the deepening cracks in Jesse's life and the continued transformation of Walt, all while Gus remains the mastermind behind it all. Episode 10, in the 10th episode of Breaking Bad Season 3, titled Fly. In this episode, Walt becomes obsessively fixated on a fly that has entered the superlab, disrupting his work and distracting him from his usual calculating self. While Jesse is working, Walt spends a frustrating amount of time trying to catch the fly, even going as far as risking his safety by balancing on a catwalk. His actions escalate as he locks himself in the lab, increasing the air pressure to contain the contamination. Jesse, however, doesn't take the situation seriously and tries to continue the meth production despite Walt's erratic behavior. Jesse later buys pest control supplies and slips sleeping pills into Walt's coffee to help him rest. During this time, Walt opens up to Jesse about his guilt, particularly about Jane's death, revealing he wished he had died that night instead. As the episode progresses, Walt and Jesse work together to finally kill the fly, symbolizing the release of Walt's inner turmoil. Walt wakes up to the buzzing of the fly again, hinting that his obsessive need for control and guilt may continue to haunt him. Meanwhile, he warns Jesse about skimming meth, showing how much tension remains in their strained partnership. Episode 11, in the 11th episode of Breaking Bad Season 3, titled Abiquiu. In this episode, Jesse and Jane visit the Georgia O'Keeffe Museum, where Jesse dismisses O'Keeffe's repetitive painting of the same door. Jane explains that the repetition was about making a good feeling last, a sentiment that reflects her own struggles with addiction. Meanwhile, Hank struggles with his physical therapy, unable to take even one step while Skylar agrees to cover Hank's medical bills, though she's not sure about the source of the money. Walt continues to manage the meth production, but tensions rise between him and Jesse when Walt takes over a task Jesse felt he should handle. Later, Jesse meets Andrea at rehab and ends up attempting to sell meth to her, but she is interrupted by her son, Brock. Meanwhile, Walt and Skylar discuss buying a car wash to launder money instead of Saul's laser tag idea.
It's a story people will believe, not laser tag. This is what we buy.
Jesse grows frustrated with his rehab group when he realizes they aren't serious about recovery. At a taco restaurant with Andrea, he learns about her troubled brother, Tomas, who was involved in a gang and killed someone at a young age, mirroring the circumstances around Combo's death. Meanwhile, Hank refuses to leave the hospital until he can walk. In the final moments, Jesse learns the truth about the dealers behind Combo's death and is consumed with anger. Episode 12, in the 12th episode of Breaking Bad Season 3, titled Half Measures. In this episode, Wendy meets the rival dealers to buy meth while Jesse watches from his car. Meanwhile, Walt and Skylar have a tense conversation about buying a car wash, with Walt pushing for more family dinners to appear reconciled. Later, Jesse shows Walt the blue meth from the dealers responsible for Combo's death and plans to kill them using poisoned burgers. Walt dismisses the idea, but Jesse vows to do it on his own. At the hospital, Hank is still recovering and insists on staying until he can walk. Walt and Saul plot to get Jesse arrested, but Mike intervenes, warning Walt that Jesse is untouchable. Later, Gus calls Jesse to a meeting where he forces him to make peace with the rival dealers. Jesse reluctantly complies, but his anger remains. That night, Jesse learns of Thomas's death and spirals into rage. In the final act, Jesse confronts the dealers with a gun, but Walt intervenes, running over and killing them both. Walt orders Jesse to run, leaving him horrified and in shock.
Run.
Episode 13, in the 13th episode of Breaking Bad Season 3, titled Full Measure. In this episode, Walt is confronted by Gus, who questions him about putting everyone at risk for Jesse. Walt explains Jesse's desire for revenge against Gus's dealers for killing Tomas, and Gus agrees to overlook the situation, but warns Walt to choose a new lab assistant. When Walt arrives at the super lab, he finds Gale has been reinstated. Meanwhile, Gus and Mike deal with cartel hitmen who try to attack Gus's chemical supplier, Dwayne Chow, sending a message that the cartel is trying to exploit weaknesses in Gus's operation. Walt and Gale continue cooking in the lab, with Gale eager to follow Walt's instructions perfectly. Gus later visits Gale at his apartment, making Walt's cancer sound worse than it is, and asking Gale to learn Walt's cooking process for the future. Walt and Jessie, realizing Gale must die, discuss who should kill him. Walt takes it upon himself, and Jessie tracks down Gale's address. As Walt prepares to kill Gale, Victor interrupts him, and Walt is nearly executed. He manages to convince Mike and Victor to hold off by revealing Gale's address. Jessie arrives at Gale's apartment. At first he thought it was a bluff, but Jessie is there to kill him. Gale begs for his life. Jessie, his eyes tearing and hands shaking, reluctantly fires the gun. This is how we have reached the end of Season 3. Hope you enjoyed the recap. Don't forget to hit that like and subscribe button. We'd also love to hear your favorite moments from Season 3, so drop them in the comments below. Till then, take care.